Imagine the eternal city's gates blown open by an army of Goths. It sounds like a nightmare, not history. Yet on August 24th, 410 CE, Rome was conquered by the Visigoths under King Alaric I. This was the first time in nearly 800 years a foreign army had seized the city, and the world was stunned. One famous story has Emperor Honorius, hunkered down in Ravenna, exclaiming in confusion, "But I thought my rooster Roma had died," having mistaken the city's fall for the death of his prized hen. In reality, Alaric and his troops really had entered Rome's walls and were looting the wealth of emperors. Strap in for an epic tale of siege and survival, the rise of Alaric I, and the three-day sack of Rome. Visual: a map of the Western Roman Empire in 410, showing Honorius in Ravenna, rival emperors Constantine in Gaul and Maximus in Spain, and Alaric's Gothic puppet emperor Attalus in Italy. After Theodosius split the empire in 395, the Goths, Visigoths, were left as unsettled foederati along the Danube. By 400 AD, however, there was no unified Gothic tribe, but rather a heterogeneous group of warriors and their families following the leadership of Alaric. Alaric had even once been a Roman commander. In 402–403, he invaded Italy under Stilicho's command, demanding to be made a magister militum and given subsidies. The stubborn Senate refused. Empire-wide chaos only worsened. In late 406, a flood of Vandals, Alans and Suebi, crossed the Rhine into Gaul. Roman troops were distracted by a usurper in Britain. Then, in 408, Honorius turned on his own general. Stilicho was executed on suspicion of treason, and frightened Roman soldiers massacred roughly 30,000 Gothic settlers in Italy. Those survivors fled to Alaric's banner. With its borders shattered and the army demoralized, Italy lay vulnerable. Alaric seized the moment. Raising a vast Gothic army, he marched into Italy in late 408, aiming directly for Rome. Visual: a sculpted bust of King Alaric I, 18th century imagination. Alaric was a Roman-trained soldier and bold warrior king. In autumn 408, he crossed the Julian Alps and hurried through Cremona, Bononia and Rimini. The capital was his goal. He camped outside Rome's 13 gates and began the first siege. Cutting off the Tiber supply from Ostia, he gave the city's guards no respite. Hunger and even plague struck the helpless Romans. Berry describes the streets full of corpses. Panic set in at once. One terrified senator had the emperor's wife Serena strangled, hoping to show Alaric he had no hidden ally within, a grim gesture, but Alaric pressed on. First siege, 408 CE. Alaric surrounded Rome and demanded surrender. Negotiators arrived, but the Goth king was ruthless. When Romans blustered, they were ready to fight. Alaric coolly replied he would end the siege only if all of Rome's gold, silver, slaves and treasure were handed over, leaving the Romans with only your lives. Desperate, the city paid a massive ransom. According to Berry, Alaric finally departed in December 408, after receiving 5,000 pounds of gold, 30,000 pounds of silver, 4,000 silk tunics, 3,000 scarlet-dyed skins, and 3,000 pounds of pepper. The Romans stripped down temple ornaments and even melted statues to raise the coin. With prize money secured, Alaric pulled his army into southern Etruria for the winter, sparing Rome for the moment. Visual: Roman citizens hauling away treasure statues to meet Alaric's ransom. Second siege, 409–410 CE. In spring 409, Alaric returned. Honorius's regent Olympius was gone, replaced by the more conciliatory Jovius. But the western court remained divided. Alaric seized Ostia, Rome's port, and again encircled the city. Facing starvation anew, the Senate consented to Alaric's audacious demand to appoint a rival emperor from their ranks. They chose the elderly senator Priscus Attalus, a pagan who, under Gothic tutelage, permitted himself to be baptized, an Arian Christian. Alaric installed himself as Attalus's magister militum, master of soldiers, and even gave his brother-in-law Ataulf a top command. With this puppet regime, Alaric lifted the siege and marched the Senate to Ravenna, forcing Italy's cities to acknowledge Attalus's rule. Attempts at peace were made. Alaric sent Jovius proposals. He wanted land for his people, Noricum and Venetia, and grain as tribute. When Honorius refused even to give Alaric an honorary title, the king was furious. He briefly offered to drop all but these moderate terms, land and food, if answered. But Honorius remained intransigent. With diplomacy dead, Alaric marched south again. Visual, Alaric and Attalus solemnly signing edicts in front of the Roman Senate, Attalus wearing a crown and a convinced frown. Third siege and sack, August 410 CE. In mid-410, Honorius summoned Alaric for face-to-face parley near Ravenna. But fate intervened. The Gothic defector Sarus, now loyal to Honorius, attacked Alaric's camp. Wounded and betrayed at the negotiation table, Alaric abandoned talks in rage. He turned on Rome with deadly purpose. On August 24, 410, the Visigoths stormed the Salarian Gate and poured into the city. For 3 days they looted Rome from end to end. Ancient mausoleums, including those of Augustus and Hadrian, were ransacked and the ashes of emperors' urns scattered. Every palace and temple was plundered. Even the silver ciborium from the Lateran Basilica was seized. Not everything was destroyed. Eyewitnesses note the Goths spared the great basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul as sanctuaries. No wholesale arson or slaughter took place. One chronicler writes that they merely sacked the city and did not burn it or harm holy sites. Indeed, contemporary records stress there was no general slaughter or wholesale enslavement during the sack. Even so, the human cost was severe. Many Romans were rounded up. Honorius's own sister Galla Placidia was captured, others were ransomed, enslaved or killed. The sack of 410 was less ruinous than the legend of it, but its shockwaves were immense. Politically, Honorius's regime was discredited and several usurpers sprang up in Gaul and Spain. For the people of Rome, it was almost inconceivable. Pagans saw it as divine retribution for abandoning the old gods, while Christians saw it as punishment for wickedness. In any case, the myth of Rome's invincibility was shattered. Jordanes later wrote that the fall of 410 dealt a tremendous blow to Rome's image as a tower of civilization. Alaric himself did not long enjoy his victory. In 411, he fell ill and died in southern Italy. His followers secreted the Visigothic king to the Busento River near Cosenza. By a clever ruse, they diverted the river, buried Alaric and his treasure in its bed, then let the waters return, even killing the diggers to keep the tomb's location secret. His brother-in-law Atholf succeeded him and led the Goths into Gaul, eventually establishing a Visigothic kingdom in southwest France, later in Spain. Western Rome would limp on for decades, but it never again reclaimed the glory of imperial Rome. The sack of 410 remained etched in memory as a warning. Even the greatest empire can bleed when its walls are undermanned. The sack of Rome in 410 was as dramatic and ironic an episode as any in history. The once immortal city lay plundered, yet the emperor who lost it fussed more over a chicken than his throne. Even in defeat, the Romans clung to dignity. Churches sheltered the frightened, and Alaric honoured them. Ultimately, though, the message was clear: empires can fall. If you thought Alaric was the villain, remember he was driven by insults and starvation, and if you felt sorry for Rome, note that its east endured. We hope you enjoyed this epic story of barbarians, emperors, and one very confused rooster. If you did, like and subscribe for more history full of twists and laughs.